Trustee districts, yeah. Council, good morning. Good morning, good morning. I know that Charlie and Michael are both remote today, but they can hear us. So I will call our special called budget workshop to order. Good morning. Before we get started, I would like to open with a moment of silence in honor of Sergeant Billy Randolph, who we lost in the line of duty yesterday. Sergeant Randolph served with the Fort Worth Police Department for 29 years and was a devoted father, husband, brother, son, and friend. We will hold a vigil for Sergeant Randolph tomorrow at the South Patrol facility, and what would have been actually Billy's birthday. I learned that yesterday from his family. Sergeant Randolph could have retired, and stories were told about this yesterday at our press conference, but he continued serving our community because he loved his job and he loved Fort Worth. And it truly is people like Billy that are backbone of this city and true public servants. They talked about this yesterday when one of the members of the media asked a question about why he was out on the highway as a sergeant. First of all, he chose to work midnights. He did not have to do that. He had earned in 29 years to work whatever shift he wanted to. And second of all, he wanted to be out there with the men and women that were within his care. And he died a hero, and I know each of us are grieving today. Give special thoughts not just to his beautiful family that is really in shock, but also to our entire police force. Watching them work yesterday was marvelous. From Chief Noakes down, they rallied really quickly. There were stories such as Jimmy Palazzani was trying to come back from Macedonia and apparently was on the phone the entire flight. That does not surprise you, who's the chair of our Brotherhood for the Fallen. So much brotherhood that's in our department, but they are really broken right now. And I just thought it was important that we level set as we talk about these important topics today and have a moment of silence. Please bow your heads. Thank you very much. We're going to move right into our budget work session. First of all, we want to give huge thanks to the Fort Worth Lab. I see Christiane, I know, is here. Where's the team from Fort Worth Lab? If you're here, stand up, please. There you are. Y'all have worked incredibly hard, and I think this is a unique budget year. You'll hear more about why that is just because of revenues in the city. So thank you each for your tireless commitment. And I'm so impressed with the work this year, David. Absolutely. I mean, just a huge difference in the caliber, the communication. You can tell the lab office getting stood up last year under Mark and then transitioning has been a big success. So thank you very much for that. And of course, to the management, you can sit. Thank you all very much. And also to the management team. I know this is a hard process, especially in years like this where the budget is so much tighter than it has been in past years, especially for this city council. We want to remember, thank you all for coming. If you're a member of the community, a resident here, this is just our first budget workshop, really just to introduce the tax rate conversation, which today is going to prove to be more complicated than it usually is. And City Manager Cook will walk us through that along with Christiane and her team at Fort Worth Lab. And as a reminder, we know that the budget is not just a collection of numbers. It really tells a story about where our commitments are in the city, the many things that we've been stretched to do in the last year, and that will play out in some of their recommendations to this council. We also know that we all have things we want to accomplish in the budget. Some are there already, some may not be. So the important thing is that this is our starting point as a council, and to ask the right questions to management team and department heads and digest everything that's been given you today. But we've tried to restructure the way we do budget because we want a multitude of different opportunities for you, both in public and in private meetings, to get your questions answered. And I think that's quite important. So with that, David, I think I'll turn it over to you to let us get started. And thank you all for being here.
Good morning, everybody. Okay. So this will be my 11th budget that I've participated in. And in a bittersweet way, this is also my last budget I get to participate in. I have had the honor to stand before you at this time of year, each year for the last 11 years, to present the recommended City of Fort Worth budget. As I've said many times, the budget is an important process. We talk about priorities and how we want to allocate our scarce resources. We talk about old programs. We talk about new programs. We talk about the balance between operating and capital. We talk about the balance between cash and debt. And we talk about the balance between needs and how to pay for them. As I think back over 11 budgets, many run together, but I'm reminded that each budget is different, just as this year's budget is different than last year's budget. And the mayor touched on a little bit. And our theme for this year is Focus on Foundations. And one of the reasons of picking Focus on Foundations is that it does describe a general fund budget that is growing much slower than in previous years. And just to put that in context, this year's general fund growth is half of what it was last year. So if you just think about that, the general fund will have slower growing revenues as we talk about this year's recommended budget. Focusing on foundation also means narrowing our focus or discussion on basic governmental roles, like infrastructure, or public safety, or the other strategic priorities of the City Council, and we'll go through that in just a second. And focusing on foundation also means attention to employee pay and benefits, and making sure that we're competitive in the marketplace. So when we talk about City Council's priorities, we've walked through these with you, it's economic development, it's community investment, community safety, infrastructure, and responsible growth. And I'm just going to hit a few highlights of what's in the budget before we get into the numbers, just to get us thinking about the components in the budget that we heard from you that, again, get funded in this recommended budget. So let's start with community safety. So the fiscal year 25 recommended budget includes not just bringing EMS over to the city, but optimizing service levels, some would say increasing service levels for our community. So EMS coming over is a big component of the 2025 budget. You'll also hear more about the first year funding for our meet and confer contract with police. And we'll talk about that amount that's built into both the general fund and the CCPD budget. But the budget will include, again, the first year of the meet and confer. Then we have enhanced police presence in some areas and firefighter gear replacement. When we jump to infrastructure, the recommended budget includes increased funding for street maintenance. It may not be the number that we all want to achieve to get to, but it's a move in the right direction and a move to increasing funding for streets. The budget includes ongoing infrastructure maintenance, preparing for our 2026 bond program, build out of our broadband initiative, and then continue investments in things that we've had in prior budgets, which include pavement markings, street lights, cast iron replacement, and so forth. Moving to community investment, the fiscal year 25 budget includes continuation of the neighborhood improvement program at 2 neighborhoods a year. It also includes the new Northwest Community Center, which will open, the high impact pilot. You'll remember that we started that in the current fiscal year. A full year funding is in the fiscal year 25 budget. That's the high impact pilot to reduce homelessness, and the reopening of Meadowbrook Golf Course. On economic development, the budget includes increases in our local chambers contracts to talk about small business development. It continues the Economic Development Incentive Fund, and something that I personally find extremely exciting, and that's our partnerships with higher education, whether it's the TCU Medical School, the Tarleton State Campus, the Texas A&M campus downtown, or the recently announced University of Texas Arlington West Campus. Moving on to responsible growth. The fiscal year 25 recommended budget includes continued investment in the 2050 comprehensive plan, a focus on open data in the public information process and making that more transparent, and a continued focus on growth through long-term planning. As we put the budget together, not just built around council priority areas, but also listening to the community. As you know, we do a biennial community survey. We get input both digitally and in person. Budget $0.79 billion. We'll go through the different funds and we'll do it at a high level today. We'll be here for all the budget work sessions that we'll have in August and September to go into whatever detail you want in any of the different funds. So this will be more of a high level today. But overall, you'll see on the operating budget, we'll highlight the general fund, debt service funds, special revenue funds, enterprise funds, internal service funds, and we'll go through those in this presentation. The growth in the operating budget is a little over 7%. So when we talk about the operating fund, a lot of our conversation goes to the general fund, which is just over $1 billion. But this enterprise of city government operating budget is about $2.8 billion. So we'll spend time on the general fund. This is where we spend property tax and sales tax dollars, so it gets a lot of attention, perhaps the most attention when we get to talk about budget. And this is just a high level when you think about the city's general fund revenues. They're mostly in two areas. When you think about 80 cents on the dollar, it's in property tax and sales tax. You'll see property taxes growing. You'll see that sales tax revenue is, we'll say that it's flattened for the year over year. And then you'll see the other revenues that are on that chart. Property tax and sales tax, again, make up the largest two revenue sources, and if you put those together, that's what, 82% of the total spend, or the total revenues. So now let's jump into assessed values and the recommended tax rate. I don't know if this, I think we shared some of this information individually with council members. A funny thing happened on the way to the final budget, and it had to do with our taxable assessed value. And so I'm going to walk us through, and this is also for the public, kind of that stepping through where we are in the current year, where we thought we might be in April, May, June, and where we find ourselves at the recommended budget here in August. So if you start on the far left, up toward the top, you see the fiscal year 2024. That's our net taxable assessed value for the current year. And that totals just over $115.7 billion. In April, we got an estimate from all the appraisal districts. And again, it's not just Tarrant Appraisal District. We have Denton County, Wise County, and Parker County. So we're in multiple counties. I'll show you in a minute how that breaks out by those counties. But the number we got was a pretty healthy growth, 9.3% growth in existing values, and 2.7% growth in new construction. So that's, again, over 10%, double-digit growth. We felt pretty good about that. But we also know that the numbers we get in April will decrease over the next few months, whether it's protests or whatever. And so what we generally do is we use what we call an average erosion over that period of time. And we have a multi-year average that we applied to the taxable assessed value. So we figured when we got the July numbers, that number would come in somewhere around $125.8 billion, right? And based on that $125.8 billion, we shared with you back in April what we thought some of the tax rate scenario would look like. So these are the tax rates based on the 125.7 billion assessed value. And so, and I'm just going to look at that total tax rate column going across. So back in April, May, June, we talked about a no new revenue rate being around 63.43. We talked about a voter approved rate being at 66 cents. And we knew that the current tax rate was at 67.25. And then we talked about, we had the ability to use an increment from prior years that would be added to the voter approved rate. So that's the voter approved rate with increment. And so the tax rate could have gone up to 68.51. This is the number that we have now in July that we're using in the budget. And so it's a fairly dramatic change. If you remember, the existing values were growing by over 9%. We now have a number that has those growing 2.3%. The new construction number actually went up a little bit, so that's a good news piece. But I wanted to take a moment on this too, as you think about the 4 appraisal districts. Clearly, Tarrant County is the largest. If you break down the existing value and the new construction is about a 2.2% increase, right, year over year. And existing values are growing a little bit over 2% year over year. Look at that number in Denton County, though. That's $1 billion of new construction in Denton County. So if you looked at just Denton County, that's a 16% increase in new construction year over year. So, and that number is going to get larger in Denton County relative to the other ones. And Parker County is increasing as well. That new construction is about a 15% increase year over year. But when you look at the totality of the taxable assessed values across the 4 appraisal districts, we're growing from 115.7 billion to 121.9 billion. So that is almost a decrease of $4 billion from the number we were using in June. And a $4 billion drop in net taxable assessed value has an impact on the resulting tax rates. Just showing that a different way before we get into the tax rates. Again, the number that is in the recommended 2025 budget is the 121.9 billion. Just showing that a different way. Red line being total appraised value, the middle line being the taxable value, and then the bottom line being the property tax revenue generated from the tax base and the recommended tax rate. So let me take a minute to describe what is happening with the tax rates. And we're using the truth in taxation formulas that are provided by the state of Texas. So if you look back in April, those are the tax rates I shared with you. The flat rate is the current rate. That's the current property tax rate. And in April, May, June, the voter approved rate and the no new revenue rate were below the current rate. Now, with the revised net taxable assessed value, the no new revenue rate and the voter approved rate are above the current property tax rate. So let me say that again. The no new revenue rate and the voter approved rate are both above the current property tax rate. Very different from where we were in June. Graphically, just showing it a different way, the green line being the adopted or the current property tax rate. The blue line, the lower line being what used to be called the effective tax rate, now is called the no new revenue rate. And the gray line is the voter approved rate. It used to be called the rollback rate. If you see the green line below the no new revenue line, the green below the blue, you'll notice that this has happened one time before, and that was actually during COVID. And for those of you who were here during COVID, you know we kept the tax rate flat because values that had been given to us by appraisal district, they looked flat as well, right? And the no new revenue rate was substantially higher than the current rate at that time. So it's now fiscal year 25. You see that the current rate is below the no new revenue rate. So in the fiscal year 2025 budget, we are recommending an increase in the property tax rate of almost a half penny, taking the tax rate to 67.73, which is essentially the no new revenue rate. I'll get technical. So in the worksheets, they actually take the decimal point out 2 other spaces. So it's 67.7346. We've dropped the 46. So I could technically say we're actually below the no new revenue rate at 67.73, but that's technically. The way we have allocated that increase in the property tax rate, which again is still the no new revenue rate, is to allocate that increase to pay-as-you-go. And I'll have a couple slides on this. With that entire amount going to street maintenance. So the increase that we'll talk about is all for street maintenance, and it is all in the pay-as-you-go side of the property tax rate, showing this just a little different way. So the operations component of the tax rate will drop slightly. The pay-as-you-go will increase by a half penny, and we will maintain the debt service or the INS rate flat at 14.75 cents. Keeping the INS rate flat is important as we see values slowing down, because we have a bond program coming up in 2026, and I think it's important, and we'll talk about this at the work sessions too, to make sure we have sufficient debt capacity to meet our infrastructure needs that we will see as part of the 2026 bond program. But to summarize again the tax rate, we're recommending almost a half penny increase in the tax rate, and that goes entirely to street maintenance. Showed it a little different way. Values are going up, as we talked about, from 115.7 billion to 121.9 billion. That's a 5.4% increase overall. We are recommending a slight increase in the property tax rate, and then that will generate property tax revenue of $783 million. Now showing how that would be allocated across the general fund operating budget, how it'd be allocated across pay-as-you-go, and how it'd be allocated to debt service. So the top line is general fund operating, not related to pay-as-you-go. The general fund revenues, the property tax revenue increase will be roughly 28.3 million. On the pay-as-you-go side, it'll just be over 10 million. And then there'll be another 9.2 million going to the debt service fund. That's the revenue side. This slide shows at a high level the general fund departments in order of size of budget. So you have police at the top, fire, and TPW, and the increases year over year. The general fund budget is increasing just under $48.7 billion. Last year, the general fund budget grew by about $98 million. So this is
Just to
half.
correct, you think 48 million, not billion.
Oh, billion, yes,
Increase.
sorry.
I know what you meant. but just
Thank you,
making sure.
48 million. We're talking about revenue, billion.
No one have a heart attack.
On tax value, million on revenue. Thank you. So these are the main drivers that we'll talk about in the general fund. Those numbers right there total to, I think it's 45 million, 45.8 million of the 48 total increase. It's meet and confer and police. That number for the first year is 15.6 million. It is also spread across two funds, the general fund and the Crime Control Prevention District Fund. You'll see the pay-as-you-go for infrastructure maintenance is growing by 10.4 million. There's 8.8 million in the budget for pay for performance for all employees. There's 5.5 million in the budget for collective bargaining with fire. There's the 3.5 million for EMS and 2 million for police positions, and it really is the full year funding of positions that were added in the current year. But those 6 areas make up nearly all the increases in the general fund budget. This is just showing the general fund budget in a pie chart. Again, when you think of police and fire, those are the largest 2 areas of the budget. Transportation, Parks and Rec, Economic Development, the next largest, and then everything else makes up the rest of the 26% of the general fund budget. So now let me walk through the highlights from the general fund, what the recommended budget achieves. Here we've put on one slide both the general fund and CCPD since we're talking about police. We'll get to CCPD in a minute, but so the the general fund and the CCPD pay for the meet and confer. Just for your information, it's about 84% is picked up on the general fund side and 16% is picked up on CCPD, and that's the allocation of payroll in the 2 separate funds. On the general fund, we're adding 6 officers and a sergeant. They were part of a COPS grant, a sergeant for the SWAT team, and funding for a crime analyst in the Fusion Center. On the CCPD side, it also includes the meet and confer contract, 3 school resource officers and a sergeant for the Fort Worth School District, increased staffing for the wellness unit, 2 NPOs for the North, dedicated bike patrols for Stockyards and Magnolia, and a new item that will be in the CCPD, and that's ballistic glass in police vehicles. On the fire department highlights, it's the EMS coming over during fiscal year 2025, firefighter gear replacement. On transportation and public works, there's an increase for street maintenance reflected in the pay-as-you-go fund, ongoing traffic engineering services, and as we'll talk about in stormwater, advancement of the delivery of high-priority capital flood mitigation in neighborhoods. Parks and recreation, sustained mowing and litter removal, improve customer experience at community centers, youth programs that are funded out of Crime Control and Prevention District, staffing for the new Northwest Community Center, and again, reopening Meadowbrook Golf Course during fiscal year 25. On the neighborhood services side, it continues the neighborhood improvement program at 2 neighborhoods each year, continues the priority repair program, and also adds 2 positions that are funded via HIV/AIDS grants. On the code compliance side, we're adding 3 positions for administrative support in animal shelter communications, 2 part-time veterinarians to better accommodate staffing at animal shelters. With our new code director, working with the lab, we'll do an evaluation of program effectiveness through the department, and it continues our boarding, home enforcement, homeless camp outreach programs that were added in 24. In the property management department, we're absorbing the cost of employee parking. We're transitioning security guards to the municipal courts. That's part of the new City Hall move-in. And it's increased our investment in replacement of vehicles and equipment. Other highlights in the general fund, some of these I've already mentioned, including the high impact pilot program. We have 2 positions added for public information and open data. We have organizational restructuring of legislative affairs moving under the city attorney. Continued focus on the good-natured green space initiative. And we're also transitioning the management, the liaison of the Fort Worth Public Art Program to our library department. On the workforce side, if you think back to those 6 major areas, we have meet and confer, we have collective bargaining, we have pay for performance, and we also have these items in the budget. One is a comprehensive compensation study. We haven't done one of these since 2013, 2014. It'll review job duties and requirements, pay structures, and market competitiveness. The budget also includes a number of classification and compensation adjustments that we've done during fiscal year 24 in a number of different departments. We're also increasing the city's contribution to health savings accounts, and we've added a child care concierge service to the benefit. And as I've mentioned before, we have implemented free parking for all city employees. As we saw that the budget was going to be tight, as we saw that revenues weren't coming in as they have come in over the last 2 years, we looked at making a number of reductions or cuts as part of the budget as well. And we'll be able to walk through some of those at a work session as well. But in general, we required all departments to really eat inflationary increases in the operating budget. The lab has done an absolutely terrific job in working with all departments and tailoring what we call salary savings based on normal turnover in each department. And so We are budgeting knowing that not all positions will be filled throughout the year. And so each department has a different vacancy rate based on historical turnover. And again, I think the lab, again, has done a terrific job in getting us to that point. We've looked at eliminating vacant positions. We'll show you where some of those have occurred. And so if we didn't think those positions were going to be filled, some of them were eliminated as part of this year's budget. We also encourage departments to look at reclassifying existing positions. So if they're requesting new positions and they think some of those new positions might be more important than some of the current workload they're doing, they have the opportunity to reclassify some positions. And so that was encouraged as well as part of this year's budget. Before jumping to other funds, we just wanted to take the average assessed value house, talk about what is occurring. I think we are using Tarrant County in this case, so we're not using houses from Parker, nor Denton, nor Wise. And so you take an average assessed value house in 24, just a little over 285,000. It's going to grow to 294,000 in fiscal year 25. Take off the homestead exemption, apply the tax rate. Again, the tax rate being almost a half-cent higher. And so the difference in the property taxes paid one year to the next is $60. Now moving to enterprise funds. We have a number of enterprise funds, water and sewer, the water fund being the largest. We'll talk about solid waste, stormwater, airports and parking. There we go. This shows the change year over year for all the enterprise funds. So water and sewer being the largest. And again, this is a regional water and sewer utility serving many municipalities throughout our region. The budget includes a recommended increase in water and sewer rates. The water is at 3.3%, sewer at 2.3%. We'll have more meetings as we talk about setting these water and sewer rates. But the increase year over year is 7.33%. On the solid waste side, the solid waste fund is increasing from roughly 82.3 million to 89.1 million. This is what provides for all the solid waste collection for all our residents. We're also recommending an increase in the surcharge for GOP and non-GOP haulers. GOP does not stand for Republicans. It stands for grant of privilege. All right. And we're recommending for new accounts the elimination of the 32-gallon residential cart. On the stormwater utility side, the fiscal year 2025 budget includes a increase in the stormwater rate of 5%. And we've targeted that 5% increase to storm drain pipe rehabilitation projects. I think what stormwater department would share with you is they've identified that that's been an effective use of identifying failures before they occur. Moving on to special revenue funds. The largest special revenue fund is the Crime Control and Prevention District. That's a 1/2 cent sales tax as the primary source of funding. We have the Culture and Tourism Fund, Environmental Protection Fund, Municipal Golf, Alliance Maintenance, and then there's some smaller funds as well. The Crime Control and Prevention District is only growing by about 2.25%. That's the slowdown that we're seeing in the sales tax revenue. But the Crime Control Prevention District is where we fund school resource officers. So there's 3 school resource officers and a sergeant for the Fort Worth ISD. Also the staffing, increased staffing for the wellness unit, staffing for stockyards in Magnolia districts, and adding 2 MPOs in North Fort Worth. And as I mentioned before, the ballistic glass enhancement for police vehicles. Quick note on EMS. The EMS will be a special revenue fund as part of the city's funding structure. That will be operationalized in July of 2025. The current budget includes $3.5 million, and that's essentially for a quarter year of the operation of the EMS Special Revenue Fund. Culture and Tourism. This shows a fairly healthy increase. The healthy increase is quickly explained by the new 2% hotel tax that was approved in May. But there's a lot of activity in the Culture and Tourism Fund. It includes what's going on at Will Rogers with the Sheep and Swine Barn.
I need a bar.
We try.
You might need.
Well, we could. A sheep and swine bar at the Sheep and Swine Barn. All right. So we've got the Sheep and Swine Barn at Will Rogers. We also have the expansion in the convention center. And so there's just a lot of exciting things occurring in culture and tourism. This is the highlights of the Culture and Tourism Fund, just to show the different revenue streams, again, that will be going toward all these improvements that we've identified. The Environmental Protection Fund, this is year 3 of the increase in the environmental protection fee. And again, we'll see those street sweepers and enhanced litter control services in the fiscal year 25 budget as well. Here are our internal service funds, the largest being our health, group health, and life insurance. We also have information technology as an internal service fund, as well as our fleet and equipment services, risk, and capital projects. Here are the increases for those funds year over year. We have some healthy increases in the group health and life insurance and on the fleet side. Back again on recapping the total operating budget. Again, the operating budgets are increasing 7.4%. The total operating budget is $2.79 billion. This slide is a crosswalk of new positions. And so what we're trying to show here is both the reductions that we're making and the additions that are occurring as part of the budget. That first slide right here is on general fund positions. So there are positions that, what we call overages, that are now being recommended as full-time positions or APs. That's 28 in the general fund. There are new positions added as part of the budget. And then we are recommending the reduction of 20 positions, so the net increase to the general fund is 24 positions. This slide looks at all the other funds, which includes culture and tourism. Parks is actually the golf fund. Neighborhood services is some of our grant funds. Police here would be CCPD. And so you look at, we're adding 45 new positions. There are 20 in culture and tourism that are made APs. And then we're reducing 39, so the total addition to all the other funds is 26 positions. Jumping now to the capital side. That was the operating budget for the city. This gives you a high-level look at our major funds that have capital programs. So we have water, general fund, public events, aviation, stormwater, and environmental services. Water being the most active deliverer of capital infrastructure. So if you look at just water over the next 5 years, $2 billion of capital improvements. $500 million in the upcoming fiscal year, or fiscal year 2025. So when we talk about capital, it's the implementation of the 2018-2022 bond programs. We're planning for the 2026 program. We have increased funding for street maintenance and increased funding for other infrastructure maintenance and pay-as-you-go and operating funds, and continued improvements as part of the neighborhood improvement strategy. You've seen this chart before. We're trying to show over time what is happening to the components of the tax rate. The total tax rate, if you just go back 10 years, was 85.5 cents. Currently, it's at 67.25, and the recommendation is to go to 67.73. With all of the increase in the tax rate showing up in pay-as-you-go. And again, that's back to focusing on infrastructure, some of the foundation of the city, focus on foundations. Infrastructure is very important. We're keeping the tax rate flat for debt service at 14.75. That'll create capacity for the 2026 bond program. And as you'll remember, what we want to say when we go to the public on bond programs, because we're protecting the debt service fund, we are able to approve these referenda and implement these capital projects without an increase in the property tax rate, right? So it allows us to go to referenda for the different things, whether it's roads or parks or fire stations, libraries. We're able to tell the public we can approve these referenda without an increase in the property tax rate. And that's why we protect the 14.75 cents. Pay-as-you-go has been important over time because it's one of our ways to maintain the infrastructure that we have built. And so the pay-as-you-go, as you see in this chart, has grown from 3.8 cents of the total tax rate to 7.5 cents of the recommended tax rate for 2025. This is how we have recommended the distribution of pay-as-you-go for fiscal year 2025. We generally model each of the areas, each of these of neighborhood services, property management, information technology, at a 4% annual growth rate. Anything over 4% goes to streets. And so when you see that blue line to the green line on top for TPW, That's the additional half cent, as well as the growth above 4% for all of pay-as-you-go that gets put into streets. So streets will see an additional $9.1 million in fiscal year '25 for street maintenance. And now just putting that all together, both the operating budget and the capital budget, you have fiscal year '24, the current fiscal year on the left, the recommended budget on the right, operating budget at $2.79 billion, capital a little over $814 million. So the total budget for fiscal year 2025 is $3.6 billion when you talk about operating and capital together. Again, the budget has been built around council's strategic priorities, which is all about producing the best quality of life that we can have here for our residents and businesses. Now let's talk about next steps. Because as the mayor mentioned earlier, this is the start. And now we have the recommended budget on the table. We have budget work sessions currently scheduled for the August 27th, September 5th and 6th. We have budget meetings in council districts, and I think that's the next slide, so I'll do that in just a second. We have the public hearing on the budget scheduled for September 10th, a public hearing on the tax rates for September 17th, and then adoption of the tax rate budget and CIP and fee ordinance scheduled for the 17th of September. Here's our community meeting schedule. There it is. That's a dozen meetings throughout the city, beginning Wednesday, August 21st, and going through September 12th. And again, we've used the theme focusing on foundations. Again, that reflects that we've got what I would say a slowing general fund budget. We're focusing on infrastructure and public safety and those components that you saw in the budget. And this is the time I wanted to offer a couple things. One, staff, and I mean this, really looks forward to the conversations and the discussions and debate on the budget, right? And we've scheduled those meetings, again, in August and September. And if we need to schedule more meetings, I know that we are willing to do that. Because this is about putting a budget together that the people around the table feel comfortable with. And it reflects the priorities of the city council. And it balances all the different things that we know we have to balance in putting a budget together. But I also want to take this time to recognize, Mayor, just as you did, this budget has been, I don't want to say funner than before, but it's been a delight working with the lab and Christiane and the staff of the lab to get us to this point in time. And I know they're excited and willing and interested in preparing whatever else we need to get to the finish line for the fiscal year 2025 adopted budget. And with that, Mayor, I'll stop. Be glad to take any questions as we move forward.
Thanks, David. I know Carlos had a question. I'll just move around. Y'all let me know.
All right, David, I just took some quick notes as you were giving a very thorough presentation.
Maybe reference, if you don't mind, sorry to interrupt you, Carlos,
Yeah.
which page you might go back
That's
to
exactly
so
what
we
I'm
can
gonna do.
easily follow each
Go
other.
to page 20 on workforce highlights. And when you cover the, or suggest or recommend that we do a comprehensive compensation study, is this study market-based?
Yes.
Okay. What will the study cover? Because
Oh,
I
wait a minute.
have three things in mind, and I just want to hear from you what you think it will cover.
Let me find that slide. 40, there it is.
I was
So-
going off the page number, I'm sorry, I think the slide number.
And if I say anything that's not entirely accurate, Deanna will get up here and clear it up for me. But we haven't done a comprehensive class and compensation study since 2013, 2014. And we've made a lot of changes to the pay system over time. And so what I think we need to do is it is time to look at that from a comprehensive way. And it's how you evaluate the classification of jobs. The classification of jobs then leads to what's the compensation need to look like for those different jobs? How do you group jobs together? What's the relationship between jobs from one band to the next? So it is comprehensive, and it will look at relationship of jobs, classifications of jobs, and what the market competitiveness is for those positions.
Okay, so in that study, any review of the philosophy around how the city takes merit raises will be considered, right? Is that an accurate statement?
Well, I'll answer, and then I'm going to look to Deanna.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So
The-
I was,
Go ahead.
so we have a pay-for-performance system in the city of Fort Worth.
Right.
It's my expectation that that would continue,
Okay.
that we are going to pay based on performance. So in the current year budget, as an example, we have a little over $8 million for pay for performance for general employees. The way we structure that is employees have the ability to get a pay increase from 0 to 7% based on performance. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
With an average of 4. I would expect the next system that we talk about from a comprehensive will still be one based on performance.
So it's very typical of, say, the private sector as well. You have a pool for, merit-based raises.
Yes.
Right? And within that, you have performance metrics which dictate how much you're going to get, right?
Yes.
Okay. Cost of living adjustments, I'm sure that's programmed in there. I don't know if I'm using the correct terms of art, but maybe since 2014, has there ever been maybe an equity-based review of, across the board, right, of how our compensation system is?
So every 2 years thereafter 2014, we have a biannual market study where we take a list of benchmark jobs. There's about 50 of those that are across different job families to make sure that we maintain that market competitiveness. So that has continued to occur every 2 years.
Okay, all right. And I'll move on to the next topic right here, just for the sake of time. I didn't notate which page in your presentation it was, but it's between page 20 and page 23. I remember seeing something about 2 public information and open data positions. Are those going to reside within a specific department?
So we have 2 positions being added to the city secretary's office related to public information and open data. Did I get that right? Yes.
Okay, so they all go, it's
Yes.
centralized, in
Yes.
other words. Okay, all right.
Good.
Okay. Now, I think I know the answer to this, the elimination of, or the recommendation to eliminate the 32-gallon cart on new accounts. I guess there's just not that many takers. It's a small cart. Doesn't really offer a lot of utility, right?
So it's a cost equation and again, a utility equation. And one of the things we can provide in a budget response is that evaluation, which leads us to that recommendation.
Okay, all right. And that's for residential accounts?
Yes.
No recommendations in as far as commercial accounts are concerned?
No.
Okay, all right. Going to presentation page 25 for CCPD, will the ballistic glass enhancement for police vehicles be a retrofit, or will it be an enhancement starting with new vehicle purchases?
So it will begin with new vehicle purchases.
Okay,
But it's my understanding the ballistic glass can be used beyond the life of when we replace a police car.
Got it, okay. Presentation page 25, EMS. The city's responsibility for shouldering, the burden of making the new EMS fire-based system work is about 90%. So for FY '25, that's considered a starter year,
Yes.
right? I mean, there's a certain projection that we've looked at that'll say it'll cost this much. Post '25 is a little, different, right?
Correct.
I know that there's at least one city that is considering becoming a member city and, adding it to our roster. So just generally speaking, do we expect those contributions from member cities to increase? Yes. Okay. All right.
What they said.
Gotcha, okay. And then the last question I had, page 32, pay-go distribution. I noticed in an earlier slide, the neighborhood services showed a decrease, right, in the funding that they were getting, but through pay-go, there's an increase, right?
Yes.
Okay,
What's happening in neighborhood services is the staffing for community centers is shifting from neighborhood services over to parks and recreation.
okay. Are we still maintaining then, David, the 2 NIPs per year?
Yes.
Okay, we're not changing that.
Yes.
All right. Those are all my questions for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Carlos. Anybody else? Questions? Elizabeth?
My first question is slide 39. You don't have to go there, but when we talk about the transition of the Fort Worth Public Art Program Management to the library, are we going to be adding positions to help manage that under the library, or is this a do more with less?
This is let's take advantage of somebody's expertise in working with cultural arts, which is our new library director, Midori Clark, and she has the interest in working with the arts to see if we can enhance arts programs without adding a lot of new money in the budget. So because we are continuing to fund in the budget the public art program, the grants program, and the administration of those two, and the maintenance of the collection.
And so previously, all of that was done by the Fort Worth Arts, correct? Fort Worth Lab. Okay. And so I'm still concerned. I don't know if that answer eases my concerns at all. I want us to do better with that program. I think we all want us to do better with that program. But our library's already stretched pretty thin, and this is a whole new avenue for them. And so what I don't want to see, we've already seen a lot of criticism from the arts community about the city's lack of support. And so if we're going to do this, I want to make sure that we're giving our staff the support they need to properly manage that program. And so we're adding more tasks, but we're not adding any additional resources to complete those tasks.
We can follow up in a work session. What I would say is we simply serve as a liaison to the Fort Worth Art Program.
Okay.
They're the ones that have hired staff to manage and implement the public art program, manage and implement the annual grants program, and the maintenance of the art inventory.
Okay. Thank you. And then my next question, and I know you talked about it at a couple different times, but I just want clarification. With the tax rate allocations the way they are and our INS, what long-term impacts would that potentially have? Well, one, I guess in the first April blush, were we planning on changing that rate at all? Like, has that changed April to July numbers, August numbers? The 1475.
I'd have to go back and look, because what we did at the time is what we do is evaluate our debt capacity based on those scenarios.
Okay.
And I just have to go back and look to see whether we would consider it. I know we would have kept the growth at a rate that would beat what we're modeling, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I just have to go back and look at the specifics.
Okay, because last year's budget, when we had discussions about the tax rate, one of the big reasons why we went with what we did is we didn't want the long-term impacts to our bond capacity. And so the recommendation that you're making here, does that have any long-term implications to our bond capacity?
So not the recommendation of keeping the tax rate the same, but I would put a cautionary forecast out there that if we have flat taxable values into the future, that has more of an impact on future debt capacity.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's all I have for right now.
Mayor Pro Tem Bivens.
Thank you, Mayor. David, you're not the only one. This is the last budget for. It's my last one, too. And I think you've done a fantastic job.
Thank you.
I do have some concerns, and I took some notes. I'm going to be looking into efficiencies, and I want to know what we're doing to see how our workers get the job done. I can give you an example of where we need to see greater efficiencies, and I think it's because of the staff's willingness to be accommodating. But say, for example, in development services, we allow every developer one free 30-minute pre-development conference. And during that PDC, that builder should come with his plans clearly laid out, with his appropriate staff there, and often they're late, they are ill-prepared, and earlier this week, I guess yesterday, one didn't even show up, he was on vacation. Now, I don't think staff is positioned to say no more, but that pisses me off because it's a waste of time. Staff has to prepare for the meeting and get there only to be told, we don't know where the applicant is. So that's an area of efficiencies that concerns me. Another, and this tags on to Carlos's concern about the study. Why do employees leave? We need to know. You know, when it comes to outboarding, what are we finding out? I can tell you we lost a critical staffer, I think, to the city of Irving, and it cost a lot of time, 2 years, on the tree study. And so we're getting close to making up that time, but it's important that we know why workers leave. Now, some of you want to see go, okay? And I understand that. If I can read my writing. Oh, when it comes to CCPD, and you know, we're talking, you know, I have a whole different idea on sacred cows, but I want to drill down into CCPD, specifically the role of the SRO, that school resource officer. There was recently a fight of about 40 students in my cul-de-sac. There was another fight with students from Eastern Hills, and they're very timely. The kids from Eastern Hills knew they had to run back to school before they were late. That's crazy, but what does that SRO do? I am told it is very difficult to get the SRO to step outside the school. And so for a few weeks, we're going to see East Side NPOs being highly visible in those communities, but that's not sustainable. And I explained, you know, we even had a meeting with school district administration recently because students who could not afford to have those decals to park on the campus are taking over some neighborhood streets, and even to the point of disrupting people's property. Now, the key is they need insurance, and so, you know, it's deeper than that, but, you know, what role does the SRO play? And I'm glad to see LT working with our schools. And finally, and this is just anecdotally, I need a Saturday meeting for District 5. I don't want to come out on a Wednesday night, even though it's really not church night anymore. But I see, is it for you? Well, we need a Saturday meeting. I have people who are retired, who don't work, but I see one Saturday meeting. So as wonderful as the Fort Worth Lab is, I need to see y'all on a Saturday, because that's when the average person can come. And if they don't have kids and they're not going to Seventh-day Adventist, I just know that Wednesday night doesn't work, so please, give us more than one Saturday. And I had something else on here. Oh, I still have not seen a street sweeper. Like to see one before I leave the council. And what is this? Oh, it's important to me that in police, we try to recruit for SWAT officers from the African-American community. That's a void there. And I don't know if we've made any progress there. And finally, when you take a look at what's happening to DART and cities getting ready to pull back, are we going to have a conversation about Trinity Metro? And that's not a criticism, but will we?
Oh, is that a question to me? We could, if you would like.
Well, if it's not on your schedule, as long as we're okay. But, it will have an impact what happens if their funding goes from that penny. But if it's not on your schedule, I'm sure we will eventually. That's all.
Gina, before we go to next questions, I might ask Mark to come up, and David can add on to this. In a meeting I had about kind of government efficiencies and employees, Mark had mentioned some work that he's going to be doing this year that might be helpful. We can talk about more in the next few work sessions if he wants to tee that up.
And I wasn't criticizing development services. I just hate to see them burdened like that.
Yes, so I'm really happy to share that we're a year ahead with the lab. We found a great individual to come on board that's a master black belt in Lean Six Sigma, and so we're going to be relaunching that this year, not waiting until next year. And they'll be looking at several projects across the city, and they'll also be training up more green belts embedded in the departments. And it's much different than the last launch. This one will include not just projects themselves as part of the training, but mentoring, so that, it's not just giving them a project and go do what you need to do and then come back. It's mentoring them, helping them to learn how to do it. And so we've done this elsewhere, and it's been very successful. And so I'm really happy that we'll be bringing that forward for Fort Worth as well.
I'm glad to hear that. I hang around a lot of Six Sigma black belts. When we hired one before, I got real excited. I didn't see anything from that chick, okay? And so the idea that at least we're in the right direction, and I would hope you could make some training available to city council members.
Sure.
I'd love to have my green belt before I left here.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay,
And
thank
is
you.
Guillermo here? No? Okay, he's not, he's probably over there working on the program, but we'll certainly do that.
Count me in. Thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Martinez, I'll just keep going around the table. Did you have one, Alan, too? We'll just go in order then. Alan, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. David, I want to say thank you as well for your hard efforts on this budget and all of the management team and staff that worked to put this together for us. I know it's a lot of effort, and it's really appreciated. As we go through it, I just have a couple of comments. The first is on slide 9. If you could elaborate on the outlier. I'm sorry.
I'm assuming it's,
The Wise County,
oh, okay. Oh,
18, sorry. I'm looking at my page number, not the slide number. Yeah, could you elaborate a little bit on why we see such dramatic decrease in Wise County?
It's mineral rights, and it's one property.
I'm told it's mineral rights and one property in Wise County.
Okay,
Yeah.
wow, okay. Thank you. And I guess the other question I have, just for sake of discussion today, with regard to the PAYGO and TPW, we've had significant discussions about that over the past several months. And can you kind of elaborate a little bit on what that extra 9.1 million means in terms of what we can accomplish with it and how we can continue to improve on our significant deficit there?
Sure, I'll do it briefly, and then we could do a more full response. If you remember, TPW identified that they could implement 18 million in the first year of the program. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Which about half of it would have been contract street maintenance, and half of it being through adding an additional crew and equipment. With this addition of $9 million, that's about half that 18 million, and it would be deployed to the additional contract maintenance that we identified as part of the budget. Is that fair?
Yeah, so, spending this additional $9 million will save us approximately $50 million in our capital bond needs of reconstruction every year. So what we tentatively have planned is one asphalt reconstruction and two panel replacement concrete projects. So like David said, we're going to be contracting out this additional 33 lane miles of heavy maintenance. So again, that's about half of our reconstruction bond needs each year.
All right, thank you for that. I'll reserve the rest as we go through our more detailed budget discussions. Thank y'all very much, I appreciate it.
Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you, Mayor. David, yes, great job with the presentation, you and staff that put it together. So just minor, and my colleagues have touched on other questions that I had. But going back to the ballistic glass enhancement for police officers, with that being under CCPD, are we going to focus on patrol or MPOs, or do you know?
So just to repeat that, that would be, we believe, directed to patrol.
Okay. And so if we are only going to get one budget meeting in our districts, I'd like to make a change to the location, from north to south. District 11 is stretched out pretty far, so I'd like to see that, because Riverside Community Center is pretty far north, a more central location, so I'll get with Neighborhood Services so we can make that change.
Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, David. Slide 41, will you go back to that one? And I know it just addresses, or I think I know it just addresses operational base cuts, but budget cuts, but as far as programs, do we have any programs that are being significantly cut back or expire in 2024 that will not be renewed in 2025?
I'm looking for help here. Yeah,
No.
not that I'm aware of, but we'll prepare a budget response related to that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? I know that when we met, we talked about neighborhood services and the neighborhood improvement program, and y'all were really working with Casey and the department on efficiencies to deploy those dollars, which I know is not really related to Macy's question of a cut, but I think there was a lot to be said of, it's $8 million, but are we spending it efficiently? I think you had some concerns about that and have really worked with Casey.
Yeah, I'll talk about our discussion a little bit. The neighborhood improvement program is, in my opinion, very popular because we give the neighborhoods the ability to direct how a lot of that money is spent. We have some neighborhoods that we're behind in spending. The goal is to identify the neighborhood and be in and out in a year, no more than 2. We're behind on a couple of those neighborhoods, and we want to make sure that it doesn't carry over to where it starts delaying our ability to start 2 per year, if that makes sense. So we're going to get with Casey and make sure that we have the staffing and attention so that we could deliver a rolling 2 neighborhoods a year. But we should be in and out within 2 years.
Councilmember Williams.
I just want to add on that really quick before we pivot. The work with the NQRC and this council on the neighborhood conservation plan was really instructive to how we execute the neighborhood improvement programs. It created a 3-year kind of plan where the first year the neighbor is working through some of the things that would take time before they get funding, and then the second year they would execute some of the funding, and the third year be done. And so I don't know what the progress is on that since we've implemented that, but maybe in a year's time, that would be something for us to look at to see whether or not that's working, or do we need to make adjustments or whatnot. Right.
Councilmember Nettles.
Yeah, I just want to add on it. You said that a couple of neighborhoods are behind. Do we lead, is our neighborhood services leading that operation? Or, because I know you mentioned the community is leading what happens, but why are we behind on those two? We certainly don't want to lose funding in that area.
There we go.
Hi, so we are working on a few initiatives. We will be going to the city manager's office to put together a proposal to bring in some outside consultants that we can use. Right now for the neighborhood improvement programs, we're relying on our staff. And so obviously with all of the funding that they have through PAYGO and bond programs, they're limited in what they can do. And so this proposal would be to bring in some outside consultants that can help ramp up that process. And so, yes, to your point, we will be taking a more aggressive approach in terms of working with our departments and to make sure that they're spending the funds and getting projects identified as quickly as possible.
And I know we're not going to belong the point, but are we having community meetings to ask the community what is needed for
Yes.
that area?
Yes, so for each of whenever we start new neighborhoods, so for example, the 2 new neighborhoods that we have at the year 1 process is really the community engagement process where we get feedback from the community. And so there are community events scheduled in each of those neighborhoods to collect feedback. And then based on the list of projects that are suggested, that's what we use in terms of going into year 2 to figure out what we're going to spend the money on. But we are collecting feedback. And we did have, the most recent events were held in May. We didn't get a great turnout. Part of it was due to the rain. And so we are looking to reschedule those events in the next few weeks to get that, to make sure we are getting sufficient feedback from the residents.
I have more questions, but I think y'all have a question about this.
Yeah. Macy, did you have something related to this? You want me to come back? Go ahead. Okay.
My comment is really for the benefit of Macy. My district was the first when we launched this program. It is a very community-involved program because the people who live in the neighborhoods get a chance to identify what they see to be a problem. I can tell you, since the launch of that program, new development, new construction has just been supersized in District 5. You know, there were vacant properties that had just been there for years. They had turned into maybe drug houses, just awful. But we were able to clean up, spruce up, and attract development. But it does take the community, and it does take staff. And for me, staff was very excited, very engaged, very motivating, because they knew that this was a partnership. So it works. You just need to know that. And I think we may have lost a little momentum with some key people leaving neighborhood services, but it's a great program.
And one thing I would add regarding the community engagement, that is the big focus of the neighborhood improvement program, because we don't want it to be after the 2 years and the city leaves, there's no one to keep up the effort to keep those neighborhoods going. And so by getting the community involvement and getting them vested in taking care of the neighborhood, once the 3 years is up, then they will continue that process. And so there is a big focus on community engagement.
Thank you. Councilmember Williams.
Yeah, just to follow up on this one, I like the idea of bringing on a consultant to help ramp up the program. I think that the consultants that we used with the neighbor conservation plan could be informative to that discussion of how do we do that, because they spent so much time helping us revamp the program. So, I mean, I would be interested to hear what they have to say on how we do that, and maybe that can save us some time as y'all are developing the plan on, you know, who to bring in to help y'all with that, doing that.
Yeah, we can certainly reach out to that. The plan is to primarily focus on the consultants for the TPW and the park and recreation projects, because they're the most capital intensive, and so that's probably where most of the consulting services would be allocated for those projects.
Thank you. Councilmember Nettles.
Yeah, all right, thank you. David, I had some questions on slide 29. And I did appreciate the extra meetings we had to get us prepared, a little bit more prepared for this meeting. I wanted to talk about the $15.6 million for the police meet and confer. Now, I do understand this portion is for just the first year. It's supposed to be a total greater number than this. What is that number, and how is it going to affect our budget as we move forward the next, I guess, few years?
I might have to follow up with that, because what we need to do with the city council is have a work session on meet and confer.
Sure.
So you know what's occurring in the first year, what's going to happen in years 2, 3, and 4. I can't remember the total amount. William, Did you hear that? That
Will you
would be,
repeat that, David? Thank you.
I heard him say it would be 80 million over the 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
So I think that's gonna be important how we break that out and
Y'all might want to come up or something. Yeah, William or whoever.
come on, William.
William's being
I mean,
shy
you got
today.
the new position, man. Let's see you. I'm Jason.
Yes. So the year one impact of the total meet and confer is about 18.6 million. And so that's about 16% of that is assessed to CCPD, the CCPD budget. The balance, that 15 million that you referred to, is the general fund impact, right? So it increases each year after that by about 3%. There's a 3% escalator year over year. So over the life of the 4-year life of the contract is approximately an $80 million impact.
Okay, thank you. And we'll have a work session to articulate that. Okay, thank you. The other question, I don't know if it was on here, I don't know if it's page 28, but we talked about the general, you have the general fund balance. And I know we talked about that. The pay for employees, is that considered, is that in this bracket here, or is that another slide?
It will be reflected on this slide. Is that in non-departmental or is it spread through departments? It'll be reflected in all the departments. An average of a 4% pay for performance. The fire collective bargaining will be in fire, and then the meet and confer is shown in the police.
Okay, with the wage that we have been discussing, what is the wage for the employees here? Is it still the $16 that you are recommending?
Yeah, the recommended budget includes an entry wage of 16.07. That's just the wage part. The budget, it will actually include, the total is 24.27. That's the total cost, including health insurance, pension, vacation leave, sick leave, and life insurance.
Right. And I know when I spoke with the lab, and I think Dr. Williams has spoke as well, our recommendation was to move that entryway from $16.07 to $20, and also providing revenues of how we get there. And I think you articulated some of that today into replacing or eliminating positions of the vacancies.
Right.
And eliminating those vacant positions, what was that total amount?
So we'll get that, I don't know offhand.
Okay.
I think there's two things that I would want to highlight.
Sure.
One is the lab working with all the departments on a more realistic vacancy rate so that we don't build savings through keeping positions vacant. If you have a vacancy, we want you to fill it because we have work to do, right? So we don't want to keep positions vacant, right? And so that number has been squeezed in the fiscal year 25 budget, so there's less likely to incur new savings in fiscal year 25 through holding vacancies. The second one was we've actually eliminated vacant positions going into the fiscal year 25 budget, and that's the number I'll get you what that savings represents in the budget.
Okay, and we have done that prior to the compensation study.
Yes.
In that study, is that study also going to tell us what additional positions we need to eliminate?
Now, that's simply about the classification of positions and how they relate to each other. The budget, the ongoing evaluation of programs is about how many positions do we need to perform different work. That's a different evaluation.
will this study deal with the entryway pay?
The study would look at pay from the entry wage throughout the total structure.
Okay. So, one of the things I know we talked about, the minimum wage increase. We talked about waiting for this study, and I see we have already made some adjustments prior to. And so with that, I'm thinking there's additional adjustments that can be made for us to get. And I know there's been some sentiments around between 18 and 20, and I'm understanding that you're not recommending neither one.
Correct.
Okay. I want to hear from the lab or someone that can talk to the recommendations that were sent over for the $20.
So let me pause really quick. I know lunch is here. We want to go through this discussion and give it plenty of time. And I think maybe, I don't want to put Christiane on the spot or the lab. Do you have something prepared that can walk? No, it's okay. It's healthy. To walk us totally through everything that you could queue up? Okay. If y'all are comfortable, why don't we take like a 10-minute break and get food and then come back in and let Christiane tee that up? So we can start from the beginning, if that makes sense. Chris, is that okay with you?
Yep, perfect.
Council? Great. Okay. 10-minute break and then we'll come back. We are ready to get started again. Thank you, thank you. Before we dive in on minimum wage and wages, can we, I basically had a question related to police. And anybody else has anything that's not on that topic, we can do that as well. Councilmember Hill.
Well, David, and really, I mean, for the Fort Worth Lab, I think just 2 agenda items for the next budget meetings. On slide 39, we talked about the Fort Worth Public Art Program, and Elizabeth made a good point, but as we're going through this process, I think it's helpful to review the contracts and make sure, they're continuing to do the same thing they were doing before. I just want to make sure that we're clear on numbers, that they still need the same amount of money, and we're clear on the contract that we have in place. And then on slide, lost my place. When we're talking about position movement, whether it's general fund or any of the other funds, can we just get clarifications for moving forward? And then specifically, it caught my eye on police, on new positions, reduced positions, and as we're doing a deep dive into that, just having a better understanding of where those positions are and the movement. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Flores.
Yeah, and David, on a different topic, I think Lauren could probably answer that, but whenever we get to that, I think in maybe last year, Lauren had reported that the city is spending around 20 million per year for road maintenance, but the need is actually greater. I think, and I hope I'm correct, 60 million per year. So I wanted to see if there was any change in that estimation. So going into our discussions, if you wanted to add anything. Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Williams.
I have two separate of the minimum wage. David, thanks for the presentation. Overall, really solid, appreciate it. On slide 28, we don't have to go there, but the non-departmental, just for the record, because it's such a large budget line item, can you state what things are funded in there?
So I'm gonna go a little bit off cuff, and then we'll get you the details.
Yes, sir.
But that's, some of that money is for the EMS funding is. It's in non-departmental. That's where we fund separation leave. That's where we have, what else is in there? Capital transfers out and some training, but we'll get you a detailed list.
The proposed is 33.8 million and last year 29, so a change of 4.7 million. Okay.
Yeah, and 3.5 of that was probably EMS. So.
Got it. And then I know we've had a lot of conversations over the past year about EMS, so good segue. The cost of EMS this year. I know in the past several meetings on EMS, we had a number of around $11 million. Did that cost include the 3.5 in revenue now that we have a better understanding of what the revenue will look like? Yes, it was net. Okay, great, thank you. That's it, Mayor, for this topic.
Thank you. Quick question I had is related to 911. Are any of the adjustments needed to 911 included in this budget, Val?
No, they're not. We have a budget of about $350,000 to $400,000 that we're working through with states. We're not sure how many of those will hit 2020
Versus the following fiscal year. Okay, thank you. Okay, David, we can shift to wages.
One more, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Please. The $11 million for EMS, give or take, are those going to hit in this budget cycle completely, all 11 million, or are we looking at that going over to 26 as well?
So the 11 million was net, so now it's just 1 quarter. Next year will probably be for a whole year.
And we're still holding, sorry, can you come to the mic? Yeah. Can you repeat that so that folks watching can hear it too?
So the question was about EMS funding and what we had projected back when you all were meeting as a committee and the council to discuss the transition. So we had for the current year or coming up, it would have been 10.8 would be the subsidy, and that's net of all revenues and expenditures. We needed an additional subsidy of 10.8. That includes all the other members. So ours would have been a portion of that 10.8, probably 9.7, just $1 million to the other cities. This coming year, when we start July 1, it'll just be 1 quarter,
Correct.
And the subsidy will be 3.5 million for all entities.
And then follow up in the previous budget work sessions, we were recommending holding that money. Is that money still held in non-departmental?
Okay, so we had budgeted, I think it was 4.2 million for this year as a transition if we needed to provide a subsidy to MedStar as they were operating, because, you know, we all know the story there as far as cash. So we have spent part of that, but not all of it. So it'll probably roll over into the next fiscal year, and we need that for startup on the 911. So this would be things like some additional ambulances to meet the response time, the new standard we have for response times. We're going to replace their whole fleet that has been delayed. A lot of that's on them, but part of that's on us. We'll probably use up all their cash before they transition over to us, because they're going to pay off their debt, they're going to pay off, you know, replace their vehicles and so forth. So the startup is important for things like making sure that the two CADs can talk to each other, or we buy a new CAD system, you know, things like that.
Makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. Okay, David, the floor is yours.
Okay, this is going to be a triple team. So I'll start, and then I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Human Resources and Civil Service. And then at some point, she will also pass the podium over to Christiane. I wanted to start by doing a couple things. One, HR has provided a tremendous amount of information around this topic. And so I think she has already sent out information about pay for employees, turnover over time. I won't get it all, but you've got volumes of information around this topic. I'm so proud of the work that our human resources team does, and I'm so proud of the organization's response to pay and benefits that I wanted to start off with a couple points. The first point is we live in a very active metroplex. We're one organization in the metroplex, and we're competing with tens of thousands of businesses and organizations each and every day for employees, right? We are competing right now for all the vacant positions that the city has, and we have to be competitive in that marketplace to be able to recruit and retain people. What I would tell you is that when you think about recruiting and retaining people and being competitive, that's pay. It's also benefits. It's the work environment. It's having the tools and equipment to do your job, opportunities for advancement, opportunities for moving your career forward. And I would tell you, I think we're very competitive in all those areas. I would tell you we're more than competitive when you take into account all the variables that are required to recruit and retain employees. Deanna is going to be able to share with you some of the data. The other thing that I'm proud of is when we're not, we act. And so if we have hard to fill positions, we look at what it takes to fill those positions. That might be an increase in pay. It might mean that we start our own commercial driver's license program so we can train our own people to get commercial driver's license to where they're not only valuable to us, they're now valuable to everybody else who's seeking somebody with a commercial driver's license. So I am very proud in our response to pay, benefits, and competitiveness in the marketplace. The recommended budget that we have shared with you today includes increasing the entry level wage to $16.07. At $16.07, that's a 46% increase in the entry wage over the last 4 years. Right? The budget also includes pay for performance increases where people are eligible for pay increases from 0 to 7%. I'm just sharing that with you because I do believe we're competitive at all ranges of pay in the city of Fort Worth. I'm going to turn it over to Deanna. She could share with you some of the data on those different components as we talk about pay and benefits in the city of Fort Worth.
Yep, so I'll speak to some of our employment strategies. I don't think this works. I'll take that. I'll speak to some of the employment strategies that we've implemented over the last few years and things that we've done to really promote advancement opportunities for our employees here in the city of Fort Worth. And so first, I'm going to talk about just kind of auto reclassifications. And this is a program that the city has implemented, and we have 24 different programs across 80 different jobs or job titles in the city. And what this allows is for departments to hire entry-level workers and then promote them and grow them in terms of skills, experiences, certifications, licensures, and then they can promote kind of in position, if you will, without having to wait for an opportunity or a person to retire, leave, or resign in the organization. So this allows departments that level of flexibility to promote their workers in position from those entry-level programs. And it crosses kind of all departments. So you'll see these programs in TPW, in the water utility, in Parks and Rec, even in the IT and the finance family. So it kind of spans all of the different city departments. We also have created a CDL training program. The estimated expense is about $3,000 and upwards of $7,000. As you know, the CDL, that function, that license, it's very valuable in the private business community, and it's a decision for individuals to be able to decide whether they want to come work for us or go work for a private employer. We've promoted, you can come join the city organization, have a good driver's license, and be in good standing, and we will train you to acquire the CDL license that's valuable to them and valuable to us. We have a number of internal training programs that the Human Resources Organizational Development Office or Division of HR promotes. A lot of those are soft skill trainings, but departments also have skilled training programs that they provide to their employees at their individual departments that are specialized in their career and industry. We also have just an emergent leader program, and so that's really creating our future talent for future supervisors, managers, and executives in the organization, and you'll actually hear from that group on the 20th of August. Our hiring activity, we make sure that our pay aligns. We don't promote that you just hire an employee at the entry of the pay scale. There's the flexibility for the departments to hire between the entry range and market midpoint. Market midpoint is what other employers in the industry pay for that specific job, and so we allow that flexibility for departments to exercise. There's always an ongoing evaluation of our pay structure and pay programs. So every year we look at different jobs. We look at evaluating hard-to-fill positions. We evaluate departments and specific turnover issues that might be occurring. In development services, when we were hearing from, the private entities that were having difficult times, we promoted a program to look at pay structures and attract and retain individuals to those jobs. And we made pay changes from 0 to 7% for those individuals outside of pay for performance. And it's not uncommon for us to have a similar approach for the water utility, Parks and Rec, and other departments as we identify those issues occurring. We also conduct our salary surveys, and so this was a question earlier. We did our last comprehensive market study back in 2014, but every 2 years thereafter, we do a biannual study where we look at our benchmark jobs, ensure that they maintain market competitiveness, and we're looking at both public and private data for those jobs so that we can adjust positions as necessary. In addition to that, just some of our FY25 pay strategies, what you see listed here is we're increasing that entry wage to $16.07 from $15.45. That's a $680,000 impact, and that's bringing individuals up to that entry wage rate. We also are proposing that comprehensive compensation study in around kind of the ballpark of $500,000. That's going to look at our program holistically, our compensation structure, our jobs, our classifications, the midpoint of the job, as well as the market competitive position of all of our jobs. Do we have the right classifications in the mix? Are we using job titles that are appropriate for the scope of responsibility? And are we valuing the job appropriately? Do we have the right market midpoint for those particular positions? We're also going to look at compression. So in the last, you heard David reference, we've increased minimum wage over 46% in the last 4 years. We've impacted our salary structure. So we used to have three pay grades that we have since eliminated as we've made these movements to our entry wage rate. In fiscal year '25, we're moving the entire salary structure up by 4%. So that means individuals will have an increased entry wage rate across all classifications in the city, and they'll have a higher earning potential at the top end of their pay range as well. So here's kind of what we're seeing and kind of just the movement of applicants. And so here's kind of where we believe that we are promoting an appropriate workplace and work culture. And we believe our employees are our biggest ambassadors, right? They're out there telling their friends and families about the jobs that we have here at the city of Fort Worth. And the evidence to support that is you can see kind of just, and I'll throw out 2020 because that was a little bit of an oddball year. But in 2019, we had about a 70,000 applicant pool that increased to 125 in 2023. So we're seeing great strides and people looking at the city as a potential employer. We're on target to hit about 135 applicants this year for all of our city jobs. And so that's impressive that we're continuing to grow and attract individuals to the city of Fort Worth. But even more proud are the promotions. So this is where we're looking at advancement opportunities that we provide to our employees. And so you can see from fiscal year 22, 23, and 24, we had over 1,600 employees promote. And these are competitive promotions. So there's a job that's advertised, they're filling out an application, they're going through the hiring process, and they're promoted as part of that process. This does not speak to the reclassifications that are part of that auto reclass program. So if I factored those numbers in, these numbers would be even greater. And that really speaks to us attracting talent in at different points in their career, but then creating advancement opportunities for them to continue to grow and have higher earning potential in the city. We also looked at just the entry jobs, both full-time and part-time, and you can see in those particular scenarios, there's growth in those positions as well. So individuals coming in entry-level positions and then promoting to other positions throughout the city. Here's the pay for performance. And so we've programmed, at least the last 2 years, that 4% for pay for performance. This also is what's proposed for fiscal year '25. And the way that increase is kind of established is we allow departments to really evaluate the performance of their individuals and their high performers and provide pay increases in the range of 0 to 7%. And it's really based on demonstrated performance over the last year. The same was true in 24 and 23, and what we've shown is that those employees that are demonstrated high performers, that are receiving on average more than the 4%, the retention of those individuals is great. So 88% from 23 continue to remain employed with us, and 99% in 24 that continue to remain employed with us. You'll see just on the right-hand side, and you've seen this before, it's the bell curve, and it's just reflective of how the management team here in the city of Fort Worth really values their employees. I've said it before, it's the best bell curve I've ever seen in the 3 cities that I've worked for in the county, where we really are doing what the program is intended to do and really kind of have an average peak, but individuals on both the low end and the high end of the performance rating. This is really key, especially when you start looking at efficiencies, right? You want to hang on to your high performers. Anything that we can do to create advancement opportunities for them, but also to recognize them with the pay variance that's going to be different than peers that might not be performing at those same levels, we want to make sure that we can continue that type of program. Here's just the entry wage analysis, and so this shows you just kind of the federal minimum wage that has been left unchanged. This goes back to 2014. So you can see in 2014, the city of Fort Worth was at $7.88 an hour. Going into '25, that will increase to $16.07. But it also shows you just the cumulative increase on average base salaries for city of Fort Worth employees, which is continuously increasing over time, and a 35% cumulative increase since 2014. Here's kind of the 4% that we proposed for the entry wage rate for city of Fort Worth increasing to $16.07. Some might ask, where did you get this 4%? Why 4? Where did that number come from? So you know that we do our biannual market studies, but we also look at private pay data and different compensation survey firms to kind of look at what was the increase that was occurring kind of around the compensation structures, both in public and private data. And it's averaging at 4% in 2025, and salary budget increases at 3.7 for personnel expenses. So that's the 4% wage holder that we proposed.
Quick question on this slide. Number one, do we have this presentation?
I don't believe so. I think it was sent out this morning. I didn't know if we were going to cover this level of detail. So if we could get it out to council, that would work.
Please,
Oh, okay.
please.
Jeanette is emailing it. It's in the Dropbox.
Thank you. It's in the Dropbox. All right, I got it. That means I have it. So the question I have on this slide, the increase is at the 4%, but what is the starting rate for these different companies?
This was just looking at these are all different companies, and a lot of these companies, because they're private consulting firms, they're not going to give us that level of breakdown, right? And just because it is, private companies don't typically release that data, so they give us aggregate data, and this was the aggregate data that was provided.
And that's fair, but it's hard to measure us with them. I know we're talking about the 4%, but we don't know if they're at 16 or at 18, because that would be a different number.
Correct, yep.
So, okay.
One more question on this. Some of these, like the first row, say reflects inflation, and I know in the city we don't do cost of living adjustments. So is this 4% pay for performance really a substitute for cost of living adjustments?
It is not. It is a true pay for performance program, but we factor that in just what we average as the kind of aggregate cost to increase pay for individuals, because it does go to base pay.
So over decades, let's call it, at a particular pay rate, pay for performance may not keep pace with cost of living. And so even a static wage, if someone wanted to work in the same job and retire in that same job right here in the city of Fort Worth, they may not keep pace with that, is basically what we're saying by not providing cost of living and having a pay for performance program that's quasi covering that, right?
Yeah, the proposed increase is using CPI as a factor, but it's not a cost of living increase. So here's just the total compensation. And so we look at just the different hourly rates and we annualize that to include all of the benefits, pension and Medi, as well as the health insurance contribution to kind of get a total rate. So this shows you, just looking at the 1607 proposed entry wage rate, the real taxpayer wage rate is $24.27 when you factor all of those different contributions in. And so, in our pension system, it's a mandatory participation. So employees often ask, do I have to do that? And it's mandatory, so we don't have the option of them opting out. But they get great benefits in return. And I know that it's hard to kind of envision that for an entry worker looking at just their base pay. But I've heard people at the tail end of retirement saying, I'm glad I didn't leave. Right? I'm glad that I was able to meet the rule of 80. I'm glad that I'm going to have lifetime payments, and it's not going to just be based on contributions that I made to my 401k or a pension plan. They're going to get those benefits for the remainder of their lives when they're eligible to retire. We also provide the health care, the dental, the vision, an employer-sponsored life insurance program for all employees. And there's a significant contribution that the city makes. You heard it in the earlier presentation. It's an upwards of $90 million, and about close to 70% of that, maybe 80% of that is employer contributions. We also have programs like the parental leave, the maternity leave, that's very specific to our organization. There's not a lot of cities that provide both. They're usually just providing one or the other. And then we have special pay. So it's not just base pay that employees receive. They also have special pay like certification pay or licensures. And so that's frequently found in our skilled trades programs, where they're able to receive different specialty pay in addition to their base pay. And then, of course, we have a pretty comprehensive professional development program that you heard me speak of earlier. So here's just the entry wage analysis, and this information was presented previously, but it discusses the 1607. It's $680,000 for the pay increase, and it affects 15 different job classifications. As you kind of just go down, this walks you through between 1650 and all the way up to 2595. But just what's the number of employees that would be impacted, the number of jobs that would be affected, whether or not it has a pay structure impact, and then the cost to increase base pay, and then the compression cost, total cost, and pension and Medi, kind of just broken out for your information there.
I'm gonna ask a question, two questions on this one. For $20 an hour, the cost of the budget is 5.3 million, correct?
Correct, for base pay with pension and Medi.
And the compression is 112.2 million, correct?
Yes.
I have a challenge with, or let me ask this question before I have a comment. 112 million, does that include every employee in the city of Fort Worth, all pay grades?
All general employees.
Okay, so for instance, in job grade 309, we have one employee getting a compression cost adjustment of 63,000. A second employee, 60,000. Another employee, 54,000. Another employee, 59,000. Another one, 56, 61, 62, 54, 57, 56, 67, 55, 67, 58. Job grade 317, another pay adjustment for one employee, $80,000.
Yeah, so the way that this was calculated, so that we can put it in, kind of paint the picture, is we took the variance of going from 16 to 19, or whatever number you choose, and applied it across all job classifications. Now, when we go through to do a comprehensive compensation study, that would be a question that we ask. Where does the ripple effect end? Because at some point it should end. And so we have 4 categories of job classifications: exempt, non-exempt, IT, and then the skills trades, and I might be missing one. But in those 4 categories, at some point the ripple effect ends. What we don't know is where that ends. And that comprehensive study would provide us a more accurate assessment of that information.
Thank you for that. That was just 2 grades that I read off. One of the things that, first of all we need, I think we can get there to the 5.3. I think the compression cost most impacts the job grades closest to where we're creating the compression. That's job grades 503 to 506. 506 has a minimum below living wage at $41,000, almost $600. And so when we decompress those grades, that's $14 million. That's a big difference than 112 million. But we don't see that analysis in this table. That's why I'm glad we're including the compression evaluation in the study. And I think that the compression evaluation needs to spend some particular time on where that break needs to happen, because this $112 million is outlandish in my opinion. Many of the salaries that are driving this $112 million get paid over $100,000, and significantly more than that.
And I want to add to that, when we get to the memo that Dr. Williams and I submitted to David that you have on your table, it will articulate that, number one, compression does not have to be dealt with the first year that we implement the raise. It can be dealt with after we go through the study and over a period of time. And so I think it's important that we understand that when we talk about certain groups not getting a compression, the levels of 1, 2, which will mainly be affected, that's closer to it. What I would also like to see in this bracket here, and the one you did previously to it, is I like the fact that you have the the hourly raise, you have the pension, and you have the insurance costs, and what the total rate would be for us as the employer at $29.31. But I'm bringing this forward not so much just for the employer, but I'm bringing this up for the employee. So what I want to see is, what is the take-home pay at $16.07? What is the take-home pay at $20? Because if we're forcing them to sign up for things that they may not want to sign up for, that is money taken out of their take-home pay in their pocket. And so while we see the $29 as a hooray that we're doing this, but what are they actually taking home and being able to feed their families every single week? So I would like to add that to this table so that we can also see that.
Okay. Real quickly, and at the risk of, none of us are economists around this table, but I will say, Chris, respectfully, that's actually I don't believe correct, that wage compression will impact the organization this year at some of that. We could argue over what the wage compression level is. You could cut 121 million and go to 60 million, but we know there are job classifications we would absolutely impact. And as I said the last session, she would have probably 500, 1,000 employees at her door day one for us to adjust. So just around the table, I think there's some things to work through around what compression really does look like. But an acknowledgement, if you were to make those kinds of adjustments, we would have to deal with it in this budget. So just for rough numbers, if we cut that wage compression figure, go back to that chart, please, in half, that's currently articulated at that amount of money, that's $60 million we'd have to come up with in this budget just to adjust on wages. And it may be less than that, to the point that Councilmember Williams was trying to make. At what level you stop, I think that Deanna, I won't put words in her mouth, but as a practitioner, you've been doing this for over 20 years, I can tell the nervousness in your voice about when you let it stop and what the long-term effects are on the organization without a wage study. I think there's argument around the table that goes both ways on that, and I understand it, but I just don't want us to throw things out there that are fact, and it may not be the case, and there's a lot more to work through. Councilmember Beck.
Deanna, I really appreciate you putting all this together. I think you can tell that it's something that means a lot to several people on the table, around this table, to see us get to a different number than what's proposed today. There's something that really, I just kind of want to set my expectations and really communicate why I think this is important and what I would like to see happen. We do have a very, very robust benefits package because your department put together that IR for me not too long ago. And David is correct. We should be very proud of what we offer the City of Fort Worth employees to be competitive. I think that there's some inherent understanding that when you do government work, municipal work, you're not always making as much as you could make in the private sector. There's some trade-offs for that. There's a pension, for example, and that shouldn't be lost on any of us when we're talking about a total compensation package. I think it's important to note that the pension is tomorrow, and we have people that need to feed their families today. And that's really where I want us to make sure that we focus on is, one, we look at the total compensation package, because that does matter, the cost of insurance, what that total take-home number is. When you're looking for a new job and you ask, okay, well, what are my insurance premiums gonna be? Because that could sometimes be the determinative of, what you come home with. And I think a lot of people make a determination as to whether or not they're going to take a job based on not tomorrow or this, but what's coming home today. And so I just want us to keep that in mind, that I'm not expecting us to get to the private sector market rate, because I don't think that's feasible, and I don't think that's how government typically works. I do think we need to make sure that we're giving our employees a living wage. And so that all of the City of Fort Worth employees have enough money to pay their bills and to live a life with dignity. And I think that's what this is about. It's about a life with dignity. What I would like to see in this chart, and I appreciate this chart, I do think there are some distinctions between seasonal jobs. A seasonal job that, say, my 17-year-old daughter might have at Parks and Rec or Dickies, and contract labor, part-time jobs, and full-time jobs. And so I know you've done a lot of data crunching, and I appreciate that. And you couldn't anticipate all of our questions, but I would like to see maybe what that breakdown looks like, at least to the $18 an hour. How many of those are contract, part-time, and full-time positions? And I mean, I'm sure you can do it all the way to 25, but that's what I'm looking for. Okay. Thank you.
I think that was really well articulated. I don't think anybody around this table disagrees that we want to make sure we take care of all of our workforce. I think, unfortunately, we have very limited revenue this year. And so our job around this table is to work alongside management and HR to arrive at what we think as a body we are most proud of. And it may not be 1607, right? It may be higher than that. So that's our job. And I think Elizabeth's absolutely right. It's very difficult on this side of the table if you don't break down by job class. You did that in some of your budget responses. And I even made notes I can give you of where I was confused or where I think it needed more clarity. So that's a great starting point. And then I also don't want us to get to a place where we lose those seasonal workers and have to contract out for them, which I like the fact that they're working for the city now. So one point of clarification. So it's even, to your point, at age, part-time status, full-time status, how quickly they promote. And then y'all may get into it in this presentation, but have we already started to make adjustments in certain job classifications that fall in these entry-level jobs that we've quickly made adjustments to? I think you have, but I want to see that. And lastly, is you may have worked with Fort Worth Lab on this already, but on wage compression, knowing there is disagreement, healthy disagreement around what that means, could you arrive at a number that's maybe not for every job classification all the way up to city management? And without a wage study, I'm just saying, if you need to throw numbers, I cut it in half, but I'm just throwing a number out there for us to react to, because I can hear in Councilman Williams' voice, he's frustrated because he feels like that's an alarmist number. I won't put words in your mouth. And there's probably others on the table that love that it's 112. So I just want us to sit with that a little bit as well. Any other? Yes, Gina. And then Carlos.
Deanna, I'm sure you've looked at the agenda for TML, and you know that the president of SHRM is going to be a keynote speaker. And so for those of you not in the world of HR, that stands for Society of Human Resource Management. And the idea of us having a debate that very few of us are really qualified to engage in, because I'm not SHRM certified, I hired someone who is, and I know you have several. I'm going to be optimistic that we can get above 1607, but I'm also cautious as to how high we can go. If you look at the front page of Dallas Morning News right now, Dr. Phil and his network, headquartered here in Fort Worth, has had to lay off 38 people. His network's not that new. He didn't know how to plan. And so just know that I respect the field of HR, and I'm going to lean on your professionalism and your staff to see what we can do to come up with a happy median. But yeah, I don't see 20 right now. I would like to see that compression rate changed and addressed like Maddie is saying. And so I'm just waiting for you to tell us what you come up with after this meeting today.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate all of the feedback, and as the HR director, I'd be remiss if I didn't stop to say, I too want to recognize our employees, right? They're the heart of all that we do here in the city, but we also have to do it in a fiscally responsible way. And so we are looking at different pay strategies. Can we decompress the compression issues that we've already created with that 46% growth in the last 4 years? And then what other strategies can we implement going forward? So we're looking at all of those different strategies and how we could advance the city, but doing it in a way that's going to be fiscally responsible, and coming back with recommendations or ideas on how we can continue the conversation.
And Deanna, you should be commended. I mean, I've seen a huge difference since you joined the organization, and your entire team really focused on taking care of our employees, not just in wages, but overall benefits. So thank you for that. I hate that feels probably like we're telling you you're not doing enough, because no one cares about it more. And that's evident in the way that you conduct yourself in your job. So for that, we're incredibly thankful.
Yeah, well, I got a great team behind me, and
Yes,
they're
you
sitting
do.
back there doing some great work. And we're in the middle of meet and confer with police and collective bargaining with fire and budget. And so it's a big lift for them, but we are very proud of the work that we do, and we do have the employees at heart. And that's part of why this conversation is challenging, because while we do want to attract talent and recognize our new employees, we certainly want to be mindful of the employees that are here today and where they started. And those are the gripes that we've had to kind of face and be able to have conversations where they feel like it's devaluing their commitment to the organization because they started at a lower wage rate and somebody new's coming in making a better wage rate than they did. And so it's conversations like that we have to manage as well.
Councilmember Flores, then you had a question.
I think I may have figured it out already just by looking at what I had note-wise and what Deanna presented, so I'll pass.
Let me just add something. I do want to say I appreciate your work, and this is not directed towards you or the city manager. I really appreciate. This is something that I have chose to be a champion in and advocate for. One of the things that running for office, we go into the community and we listen, and then we say, well, can we champion this? So this is just something that we want to champion to get to a place of $20 an hour. It's not to say that nobody around this table doesn't care about the employees. I think we all do. Yep. I think that when we first got elected, we knew that we were low on firefighters, and it was not in the proposed budget at all. And we sat around this table and we had a hard conversation. And even in the first conversation, it still wasn't proposed. And then it wasn't until we kind of started counting to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it was like, okay, we have enough to, if you don't put in the budget, we're going to put it in the budget ourselves. And so then we had another conversation about how do we attract police officers, recruits. And that was a challenging process too, but we did that. And so this is just me saying, I appreciate the work that we have done. It does need to make sense. We don't want to break the city, but we also want to make sure that we can champion the less of those who make less than $20 an hour. And I do agree with Elizabeth's point, because there are some positions that are part-time. There are some that are seasonal. There are some that that may not make it up to that qualification. And that's just the other table that we need to break down. But this is what we can see, so we can make a real strong decision of how close we can get, because that number will change. I think those numbers of 700 employees, it might drop down to 500. So,
It
but thank
changes as
you.
we speak, but I appreciate that, and I'm sure the employees of Fort Worth appreciate that as well. It's, one of the fastest growing big cities because of our employees, and so we want to make sure that we're mindful of them. I have just kind of another slide, and then I'm going to actually turn it over to Christiane, but it's just really speaking to just our salary structure, and this is why our compensation evaluation is necessary. We've fractured our structure with some of our compression that we've created, and then just overlapping of jobs, and we have some entry jobs that sit next to some more technical jobs, and typically you want a variance between those types of positions, and we don't have that anymore. So just, some ideas around what we need to address as part of that compensation study. And then with that, I don't know if we're...
Councilman Williams?
Yeah, just before you go, Deanna, I want to express my gratitude, and there's probably 99.9% of this presentation that I agree with, and it's under your leadership, and I'm super grateful for that. Over the past 6 weeks, maybe more, especially the past year, I've asked for quite a bit of data on this. This isn't a new conversation. We've been working on this for a year to get to today's conversation, and y'all have been instrumental in that. So thank y'all for the work that y'all have done to this point. I also want to commend this council and then the previous council 2 years ago, because in 2021, we made the decision as a council that $10.98 was not going to achieve our goals of quality of life. And so we created the structural changes because we knew there was a structural inequity that was creating conditions where people in the city of Fort Worth, working for the city of Fort Worth, could not work one job in the same job for their entire career and retire with dignity. And so we, as a council, over the past 2 cycles, committed to every year addressing this conversation. And so just want y'all to know, and I know y'all know, this is a new conversation for this council. This is something we've been pushing. And I think there's a lot of commitment around this table to address all of the challenges we have, and we must do that, and we're going to do that. And so I want to encourage y'all that we're going to get there. We're pushing because we believe we can get there.
Councilmember Hill?
Deanna, thank you so much for this. Do we clarify for me, you know how much I love consultants and studies. Will you go back to the very first slide on the $500,000? Is this being initiated because of this conversation, or we do since we have not had a study since 2014?
It's both, but really, the last study that was done in 2014, the market has changed so drastically between then and now, which is talent being a competitive environment in the Metroplex, but having more jobs than people, that we have to do something different. So it stemmed from originally that concept, but then this conversation lends to it as well, because we need to evaluate, do we have the right entry points for all of our jobs? Especially when we've made decisions in the last 4 years, coming off the heels of a comp study 10 years ago, where we've made compensation decisions and we've cut off the bottom structure of our non-exempt jobs. So it was necessary. Okay. So kind of a multi-pronged response to that question.
I have heartburn over $500,000 in the study, so I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon for typically studies of this nature to occur in the HR environment at least every 20 years. In the government world, probably more 20 years. In the private sector, probably more 10 years. So we're kind of due for a study.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Martinez, and then Councilmember Flores.
Deanna, I just want to say I think you're amazing. I mean, I'm not the expert here, so I just want, and I hate to make this comparison, but, you know, Dallas, city of Dallas got to 1850 years ago, and now they're going to 1925. So what can we do? You know, what can we learn from them? You know, just, is that
I
something we can
think
also
people would
do?
still want to work for Fort Worth over Dallas. I hear it all the time.
Yeah, and imagine if we got to 20, so.
Yeah, but certainly those part of what we want to evaluate, and how do we create it in a way that's going to address it all, right? I think is the main component is what's that minimum competitive pay rate and the entry level, and how do we address the people? And that's my biggest concern. How do we move people through their market pay range? And I'll tell you, I've heard it time and time again, we move our salary structure. So what happens is people still look like they're running in place, right? They still look like they're at the entry level of the zone. I'd like to move people through the zone so that we can then hire more competitively, and we're not bound by a minimum entry wage rate, that we're bound by what do you bring to the table, what's your license, what's your skill set, what's your education, and that we pay you for the value and the knowledge you bring to your job. We're not there yet, but we will get there.
Councilmember Flores.
I guess this is either answerable by you, Deanna, or you, David. Just generally speaking, any wage increase that we contemplate, and again, in any organization, employees are ultimately very important and critical. But there is a cost of doing business with a city, right? With any given city. Those cities that have a higher minimum wage, it's more expensive to do business with them on multiple fronts. We haven't talked much about that, but that's been something that I've been very cognizant of since day one. I've seen some information, I guess, you know, from, I know I've talked to Fort Worth Lab about it, but, you know, I don't feel completely comfortable in trying to land, I guess, on a prescribed, you know, minimum rate until I understand that better. And, you know, I don't know where it comes out in the wash, Dave, but generally, I mean, you're going to see, when we have a, you know, in a previous IR, we have a recommended list of rates and fees that the city charges, you know, the public to do things. Would those be impacted?
Nothing is free. So yes, and I think what Deanna's trying to show, there's a direct cost of raising the hourly rate, right? There'll be a direct number of employees that are affected, and we have that cost. The compression is a little bit more of a variable, right? And how, depending on how far we go. If we raise the entry wage rate, it will affect some areas on user fees because those are fee-supported positions. There'll be some, if they're in the Cultural and Tourism Fund, that'll increase our rental rates at Will Rogers, the Convention Center, so that those costs will then be passed on to users. So yes, it does have an impact in where the costs show up in how they're paid for.
Thank you.
Councilmember Williams.
Yeah, just to dovetail Councilmember Flores off of your question, I just want to give some color to that. That was part of the reason why Councilmember Nettles and I worked so hard. We want to be and are good fiscal stewards, and we are fiscally responsible. We manage budgets here and outside of here. And we wanted to make sure that the proposal that we proposed was cost neutral. And so, you know, it costs $5.3 million to adjust the minimum wage to $20. With just the vacant positions excluding first response. This is part of our proposal, was that amounts to $3.2 million. So we're over halfway there. In the first year of making this adjustment, if we freeze the merit pay for employees who were positions who were adjusted to $20 an hour, that would be almost $2 million. So now we're at $4.5 million of the 5.3. So the magical question is, where do we get the $874,000? There's a number of places we've heard today. We have some ideas of how to get there as well. But part of our job as council members is when we're making proposals to figure out ways to make them cost neutral. And this is a great way of doing that. That wouldn't in this budget impact any of those things that David mentioned. And next year, our job as a council would begin all over again. We have to do this every year as a budget. That's part of our job. And so I'm very confident that we get there, thanks to the amazing work that the Fort Worth Lab and HR did in providing this data. We didn't want to be irresponsible and just pull a chip out the bag and hope that it's crunchy, if you will. But we spent a lot of time at this and wanted to make sure that it was cost neutral.
And I think that's why it's important that Christiane, talk to what we presented, because it is some cost savings in that.
Let me just add one more thing. I'm sorry. Vacant positions. On average, the vacant positions we're looking at on that list have been vacant for almost 20 months. That means they were carried over 2 budget cycles. So I think that's an important consideration when we talk about, these vacant positions as a good solution. And if they get filled, then we need to do a budget reconciliation during the year. But I think that those funds have been there quite a while. There's some jobs, one in particular that rings my mind, and I know it's a hard to fill job, but 1,900 days. So some of these positions haven't been filled in quite a while. So it doesn't really have an immediate impact. And so that's why we thought it was a good, funding source to be able to get us there. And then we start all over again next year and keep building.
Councilmember Bivens, and then Councilmember Hill.
I like the excitement and the new energy that I see coming from council members Williams and Nettles. But I will tell you, it's easier when you bring people along the way. Carlos will tell you every quarter, I would always ask the city manager, give me the list of your top 4 leaders in every department. Because what I was looking for is, where is diversity? I did that around the table and didn't send out any 9 o'clock emails. Old people can't read that late at night. But we got to the day where I saw, I think it was 3 African-American males in leadership here at the city. It was so unique, I took a picture of them. But I would encourage you, work the phones, talk to your people around this table so that you don't have to make the sale right here, because it's very difficult right here. But I'm just telling you how I was able to make an impact that I was glad to see. And I am by no means opposed to $20, but I am respectful of the role of HR. And I don't want to be a city in the headlines, that we see 2 years down the road. We took a step we should not have taken. And so wherever it lands is where it lands, but you got to work it and bring people along with you.
That's fair. And, we've been working at this as a body for years, but especially in the last year, my style of leadership is a little bit different. I like having conversations transparently.
No criticism, but I got an email last night and I was sleepy.
Yeah, that's because we got information late, but that's a whole nother conversation separate of this. But point well taken. I want you all to know, as my colleagues, that I value this type of conversation out in the open so much, that I don't blow up your phones to try to get y'all to, or persuade y'all to do anything. And so that's why I'm glad we're having this discussion. I've had it, over the past couple work sessions.
Wonderful.
And I want to just speak before I turn it over to Christiane. Councilmember Hill, just to your question on the compensation study, there are 2 things that people take personal that I've learned in the workplace over the last 30 years. Their pay and their job title. And so it only would make great sense for us to include a consultant that specializes in that area, because both things could affect both of those things could occur, right? Job titles could change and pay could change. And we just want to make sure that we have outside experts that are connected with us at the hip as we make and go through evaluating what the classification structure needs to look like.
Councilmember Hill, question?
Not even a question, I just want to comment on what Carlos said. I just want to make sure that we're clear too, this is not an isolated conversation to this budget, because this is gonna, whatever we decide is gonna impact the city for years to come. And to Carlos's point, and David said it as well, user fees are gonna be impacted. The fees that people spend to have events, I don't want to lose business in Fort Worth, and I don't want people not to work with us, because it's gotten incredibly expensive to hire people, retain them, and then provide those services to the city. And at the end of the day, it's the taxpayers that are gonna pay for it. And I agree, I think this kind of been just thrown on us with a random number thrown out without really any evidence behind it. So as we continue these conversations, let's just be cognizant that this is a long-term decision. This is not, this is a budget cycle or next year.
Councilmember Blaylock.
So I want to say thank you, Councilman Williams-Nettles, for having this conversation. I think we've heard a lot of things, over this last hour and a half. I want to thank Deanna and the HR team for all the work they've done here as well. For me, I really appreciate the idea of a study. I like to have fact-based discussions, and I get what we're saying. A lot of numbers have been thrown around, but there's not a breakdown. There's not the impacts of that, and so I do really like the idea of the study. That's just all I want to say.
Thank you. Okay, Christiane, I think you can keep going, whoever's going.
Hi.
Christiane, I bet you have some thoughts about the new chamber and podiums and how tall they should be.
I do.
I bet you do. Okay. Height discrimination is a thing.
It is.
It really
I
is.
feel.
It's not a protected category, though. I'll just add that.
Councilwoman Bivens and I are going to move to change that here at the city.
Perfect. I look forward to it. So I know we've covered a lot of information today. I want to do two more things, if you can hang with me. So the first topic I think is helpful to this conversation. It's adjacent to the conversation because we've talked about the MIT Living Wage Tool as a framework for the entry wage discussions. And so a couple of you at least, I think I mentioned this even in our last work session, are aware that the lab began to look at the living wage tool and sort of analyze its framework, its data sources, et cetera. So I just want you to know that I'm going to show you kind of what we did, and then it can be part of the conversation as much as you'd like as a resource that's available to you for sort of these data-driven decisions. So the lab analyzed the MIT Living Wage Tool through our data analytics division, sort of separate from the budget process. So they dug into all the different data sources and looked at what percentile or average are each of them using. And so the table there, which is in your presentation, shows the cost categories of the Living Wage Tool and the source that MIT uses to pull its data from. And so then you'll note that I've added another column here to show, and I called it insufficiencies, which is sort of an academic word, but the MIT sources often are captured at the national level, not so much the state level, but really often at the county level. And so what the lab did and the data analytics group did is localize the data as much as possible at the city level in order to just get a more accurate local picture. And so I'm going to show you kind of how that worked out. But the other thing outside of integrating local data where we could is we looked at the different percentages and bounds where applicable. So for instance, in housing, if the MIT tool used 40th percentile or 60th percentile, we might have looked at 20th percentile to 40th. And some of that gets a little subjective about what an average house should be, or an average situation, or what's, we talk about living with dignity, what percentile is that? It's a little subjective, but we've done a bit of that exploring. So through the integration of those local data sources, the lab resolved a lot of the, what I'd call insufficiencies in the MIT Living Wage Tool. And again, it's a very useful framework. But you can see here in green where we were able to substitute either a different sort of percentile for exploration or integrate local data into the mix. And we have some ideas for how to improve this living wage calculator going forward if we want to keep sort of revisiting it quarterly or with the budget process. But you'll see some of the red there. The only things we didn't really improve upon were the childcare costs. Those estimates are still in at the county level. And then civic engagement, we actually have that out of our tool, and I'll tell you it's because we figure there's lots of free civic engagement activities like parks and libraries. But again, that's a subjective decision that takes into account opportunities in Fort Worth. But let's see. So on housing, we used the same HUD fair market rent, but we moved from, instead of 40th to 60th, we bumped it to 20th to 40th percentile for the purpose of this conversation. And you'll see in a minute how agile that can be. And then we use more local data on food, we use more local data on transportation, we use more local data on internet and mobile plans. So I think I've covered most of this. The other thing, we layered in actual health costs from the city of Fort Worth since we'd be talking about our employees. So we were easily able to insert the cost of our own health plans and the pension, which the MIT living wage tool doesn't capture anything for pension. We changed the tax calculations because the tool had a placeholder for state income tax, so we obviously removed that since we're in Texas. And then our version of the calculator also adds a little 5% buffer for savings. If a family was in a situation where they could save anything, there it shows sort of what that would look like.
Christina, could you back up to the slide where you guys took out civic engagement? I want you to think about the fact that in Fort Worth, we're really nationwide. If you're beyond that 10 minutes to a public park, you are underserved. And I don't know what other factors you looked at for civic engagement, but I would make the case to put that back in.
Okay.
Because it helps us get more parks throughout the entire city, especially those communities where you are underserved.
Yeah, I could see that. That we could add $1 back for civic engagement.
That's millions of dollars, a little private jet.
I know. No, it's good. No, it's helpful. It's helpful.
Councilmember Williams.
Yes, and thank you, Christine. I love this tool. I told you on Friday when we all met. It's brilliant. One question I didn't ask Friday that I think is helpful today is what the dollar amount for the rents at 20th percentile and 40th percentile is. Do y'all have that on hand? Because I think it'll inform what the wages y'all are going to present using this tool are based on the 20th percentile.
I have the hourly rate broken down, but not the 20th to 40th percentile here. It's probably somewhere on my computer. But I figure we'll do a written response on this that sort of breaks down the categories, so I'll make sure to include that. So here's a snip of what the tool looks like with some of those assumptions that are made. So you can see in some spots we're really close to the MIT tool because we borrow a lot of their methodology and data sources where appropriate. And then you can see there's other fluctuations, especially when people have no children. And so we need to just dig into why that is. It's primarily due to the cost of housing and some assumptions made in the cost of housing.
Christine, can you go back to that chart really quickly? This is maybe more for Deanna in a future agenda item or as she thinks about a consultant or other support systems for our workforce, but let's focus on the 1 adult, 3 children. Let's pretend we have a single dad with 3 kids and know their source of income, and do some additional analysis around our employees and our question, open question, are we better partnered with some of our nonprofit partners, whether it's Catholic Charities or Pathfinders, to help an employee move up the ladder? Are we really giving individual attention? Do we know how our employees are doing? And I think that is important as we have this conversation, because there's a huge difference between a single adult, 0 kids, to a single adult, 3 children.
Absolutely. Okay, and the last thing I want to touch on this is a breakdown of how it, between the labs sort of single, 1 adult, 0 children rate, and MIT's related rate breaks down across those categories. So you can see the insertion there for pension and savings, and then the reduction of civic engagement, but note taken. And then sort of the way that interlaying the local data categories or sources changed among them. So you can see a big swing is in housing, so the rent numbers will be important for us to look at. And the best thing to me about the tool the calculator we created that MIT still doesn't necessarily have at this level of detail is a sensitivity analysis so that you can build agile scenarios. So if you wanted to say, Councilmember Williams, I don't want to use the 40th percentile, I want to use the 60th percentile for housing or rent, and whatever that number is, we can easily plug that in and it reruns those rates and shows the breakdown. And so it allows for some agile decision-making. If you're like, I don't buy that cost for transportation or whatever. So it's pretty flexible that way.
Your question again,
Yeah,
Councilmember Williams.
I think it'd be helpful if we had this at every percentile. It would have been helpful today because it kind of boxes in the conversation a little.
Percentile of housing, Jared?
Yeah, of
Okay.
housing. So
Okay.
20th, 40th, and 60th. I think we should, spilled milk, but I think we should have added it today. That way we can see what the housing does and also follow up to that. I think we need to know what the housing rents are if we know whether or not the 20th percentile is even feasible in our local market.
Yeah, they're using the HUD fair market rents, but maybe we can create a schedule that sort of shows them all. Okay. Okay. So we can make the calculator available if anybody wants to dig into it. We can do a live demo of it at a work session, however you guys want to handle it going forward. But I wanted you to know about that ongoing work from data analytics. It's a good example of what I think the lab can be capable of as we continue to build that data capacity. I think even 6 months or a year ago, we wouldn't have been able to sort of run our own calculator. So it's exciting development.
Carlos.
Thank you, Mayor.
Second, Councilman Mills.
I know that the MIT tool is predicated and designed around the assumption that there's a state income tax. And I know I had a conversation with you some time ago, Christiane, so forgive me if I forget what your response was. But if you zero that out as a input to start with, do you have to make any adjustments to the tool knowing it was designed around that assumption to account for no state income tax?
So the calculator, the MIT calculator, if you're running scenarios in that calculator, it's going to add the state income tax automatically, and you'd have to manually zero that out. I'm not sure that it's agile enough to do that. The Fort Worth Labs calculator already corrects the tax. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and looking up there, I know that we have to account for, sales, tax, et cetera, like that. But you're saying you don't know for sure the sensitivity of the tool when it comes to just input zero?
I know the lab's sensitivity to the tool, that this $2.26 doesn't include state income tax, but it includes federal income tax and other taxes that'd be relevant to when you live in Fort Worth.
Okay. Understood. Thanks.
Councilman Mills.
Yes, I just wanted to add a couple of things and ask you to articulate it for me, because they like to hear you say it, because they think I make things up.
Uh-oh.
I want to say this too. Jared and I have had conversations with staff, with Christiane, with Mark, with David. And so although, I do sit at home and write things down, but I do get factual information as well. One of the things I want to talk about real quick is the 1607, right, is the proposed rate. And they're going to get a merit increase that is going to take them to $17. What is that amount in February?
Mm-hmm. So you're saying if they're at 1607 and then they get 4%, so they'd go to 1671.
Okay. And so, because I was under pressure we had a meeting the other day that some would go to $17, which is close to the $18. And so,
Maybe if they get more than 4%, let's see. Yeah, so if they topped out, like the range is actually 0 to 7. So I guess if they were an extraordinary performer at 1607,
all of
then
them
they
they are.
I know.
Yeah.
At 7%, they would go to 1718 or something, 1719.
Right, and so we're talking a little less than $1 to just get to 18. Again, I'm not advocating for 18, I'm advocating for 20. But when we start really getting into the weeds of the nuts and bolts, that we may be at 16 October, but some may actually get to 17, or at least close to 17. And so are we really talking about $2, $3? Or are we talking about less than $1? And so as we alluded to fees, and I think that was, no strike, but I thought that was kind of weird to bring up about fees in a minimum wage discussion. And so if we can get that calculated as well on a discussion, I think it would be helpful to have a longer discussion on a work session for the minimum wage, because this is important to me, I think a couple of other council members. And if it's just mainly to make sure that we're educated publicly on this, so when we do make that, I know David has made a decision, our city manager, we appreciate that, and our staff, thank you for all the work. But if there might just be an opportunity where we want to make a council decision to change that. And so I want to make sure that we're all educated on that if that comes to a head.
Got it. Yeah, and it might be helpful to segue just quickly into what I think will be my last comments as far as the proposal you received from Councilmember Williams and Nettles and some of the strategies that are in there and some of the work that the proposed budget already takes into account. So I'm gonna try to lay out where we are, what we have and haven't looked at in order to sort of plan what our next steps will be. So some of the work already done with balancing strategies that led to the budget you saw today. We've already looked at long-term vacancies. And so, for example, in the general fund, that position's over a year vacant. I think the total is 2.3 million. That's just general fund. You're quoting the whole fund number. So of that 2.3, the proposed budget eliminates $1 million worth of those 2.3 positions already. And those that are not reduced are, I mean, we have the status of recruitment for each of those. Some of them are positions that if we eliminate them, we'll pay more in contracts that we outsource, like forensic science and engineering. So there's some strategy to what we've already reduced or not. That doesn't mean we can't revisit those in a budget response or in the 27th work session. But I just want to make sure we're not double counting based on what we've already done. The second is freezing the merit pay for positions that get adjusted. I think the data we've been showing actually does it in the opposite order, that we do pay for performance and then raise the floor. And so I don't know the difference between those two. So we'll make sure we follow up and know how the order of events changes the total number. And then Deanna mentioned we've already started working on decompressing sort of previous compression issues where the entry level positions are bumping up against some of the more technical positions. So that's an ongoing analysis. And then any other evaluation of using the 4% pay for performance as like a balancing strategy, maybe taking it to 3 on average, or we have not done, I don't have those numbers today, so we'll have to revisit those on the 27th. I think I got most of it. I think the other thing in the proposal is just a reevaluation of projects for maybe timing issues that wouldn't be completed in fiscal year 25. So we might need to visit more about what kind of projects you'd be thinking about. I know we've talked about capital, which would be one time, but maybe you have other things in mind.
Councilor Williams.
I just have one follow-up to that list. On the pay for performance, I saw a different number today of 8.8 million. Last week when I requested this, I asked for 3 budgets worth on Friday or so. But in fiscal year 23, it was 9 point some change million. In fiscal year 24, it was 10.4 million. And then I asked for the recommended in this budget, and y'all said it was 11.4 million with $1 million growth every year. So can we go back and double check that number? Or maybe y'all can speak to it.
Sure, I can talk about it. So you saw that on the general fund drivers slide. So 8.8 is the general fund portion of pay for performance. The 11 is the total across funds.
I got it now. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? No? Okay, very well. David, I think that's the last of our questions. Anything else we need to cover today? Otherwise, looks like we are going to have a pretty good session on the 27th. You got all your questions answered, Christiane?
I think so. We got a good plan.
Okay. It's not really a future agenda item. Are there any other items that you want addressed? You don't have to say them right now. You can also provide them to Christiane's office, but now's your chance to say them out loud if you have anything that you want to make sure it gets covered.
Yes, any other department deep dives or other like topics you want to see on the 27th or 5th or 6th. We can program those in now.
I think we're good. Okay, perfect.
Fabulous.
Folks, meeting adjourned.
Thank you so much.